Sam, hi.
Hey, Steph, how are you?
Hey. Yeah, great. Good to see you from one side of the world to the other.
No, very good. Early morning for me, late night for you.
Wonderful. Wonderful. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you today. There's so much to talk about. You've got so many ideas. It's actually going to be really hard to encapsulate them all in one place, but we'll give it a go. And of course, what you're known for, to me, is for bringing joy to work. This is the, point at which I heard you on Dart's podcast, and I heard that and I was like, I have to meet this person. So I, really feel like a kindred spirit with you from, again, the other side of the world, but in thinking about how can we re-architect work to bring more joy to people. So thank you for all of your work in that space. Yeah. And some other things that I know you're known for to many others as well is arguing that transformation should start with people, not processes or tech. That reframing AI as a tool to amplify human creativity is the goal, not to replace human creativity. That
Absolutely.
pushing organizations to redesign work itself, not just jobs, is a thing. And fourth, bringing a systems thinking lens to talent and future of work challenges. Have I got that right?
I mean, Steph, I feel like maybe you should just introduce me at all times. This is a good, that's really cool. Very awesome. Yeah. So, yeah, I love it. Yeah, you have that right. That's great.
Okay. And speaking of which, I should probably introduce you. So, as the managing director for Randstad Advisory, you are responsible for helping clients and some of the most progressive organizations right around the world with their workforce challenges. Is that right? Yeah.
It is. And there are many of them. Let's face it. It's an interesting time in the world.
It really is. And most organizations are trying to think about what does my workforce look like in the future? How can I start to redesign that? Where do I start? And so on. And I thought we'd sort of go through a few things. But the first one I'm interested in is, let's say I am a CEO of a really large, complex organization, and I'm thinking about what does my future workforce look like, or how can I take advantage of AI, and what does all of this mean for me? What's the first step I need to take? What's like going from 0 to 1?
I think there's a first, I mean, it's amazing if people are thinking, what does my workforce look like? Let's take back. It's usually like, how the hell am I going to make sure there's growth in the next quarter and the quarters to come, right? And that then talks about, so if that's the case, how do I get this work done? What I don't CEOs necessarily translate that to, and understandably, is I need to do work design. So I think the first thing is just acknowledging that. I think what we hear from lots of leaders, and again, rightly so, is I want return on investment on AI. We've put in loads of effort and energy. How do I get return to make sure that my organization performs and wins? That's essentially it. And so just acknowledging actually that the way to get a return on investment AI is to think about how you redesign the work, then you get a much better return on investment. I think a starting place for that. Yeah.
So redesigning work. So you talk a lot about pixelating work. What does that really mean? How would you go and talk to executives about that?
I mean, it's been such an interesting journey. And look, as we are doing redesign work and we're putting AI and we're learning so much as we go, but the journey has been a few years in the making in terms of testing and learning with organizations. But pixelation of work essentially was breaking down work from outcomes and impact into tasks, into skills. And it is breaking it into smaller parts and then putting it back together. What we learned in our journey, though, Steph, is that you can do that in the current box. So, and you do get some kind of changes with that. So, in other words, what we did when we first started doing is we took a job or a group of jobs or a workflow and we said, in that workflow, what tasks are happening in that workflow? What should AI be doing? What should humans be doing? And how do we do that better? And we certainly saw some, oh, great, we can save time, we can do this better, etc. But it's still in the same box you started with. And that's really where we were kind of like, hang on a second, if we change the box in which we begin, we actually see some real change and real impact happening. And so that's what we termed traditional pixelation, and that's how we started, and we learned lots from that. We then moved into a process called pruning, and I know, it's essentially was looking at if we break apart the workflow as it stands today, or the job family, or the jobs as it stands today, and say, what would we reshape this as if we imagined something a bit different. And when we did that, we got some really very different outcomes. And actually, probably 90% of the work we do today is in this space. People still have things that they are dealing with. They have legacy, they have all of that. So those constraints always come back in. But when we allow people to imagine something quite different and then think about how we put AI and now agents and humans together to work, we get a really kind of much bigger uplift, probably 30 to 40% versus the kind of 15 to 20% that we saw. We then have something called gooing, which is when you completely reimagine something. And it's much more rare than we use pruning because it's really where you've got something where you are just creating something new, either a new line of business or you want to completely eradicate what you've done before and completely reimagine. And gooing comes from, we use lots of things that happen in nature to inspire us, yeah? From where a caterpillar completely dissolves in its chrysalis and then it grows its wings. It doesn't just grow wings and become a butterfly. And so we're asking people to completely let go of things and then create something brand new. It actually really gets people's imagination going. But Steph, actually, when we do it with people in the organization, both leaders and the people who are doing the work, probably one of the hardest things for them is imagining something different. And that's really interesting given the AI world. We're trying to uplift the human skills that we need. And one of those will be, how do I reimagine things? How do I think about things differently? And so it already gets them skilling in that space whilst we're doing the work design, which has been wonderful to see and is really interesting.
Yep. Yeah. So what would separate the organizations that are doing this well from those that aren't, just from the get-go?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. So the first thing is the acknowledgement this needs to happen and we're taking this seriously. We've seen lots of organizations move along the skills profile, etc., and that's really important, but you have to connect it to work that's going to give impact. So the first thing is understanding what that impact is and understanding how that impact then relates to tasks. So getting that done. The second thing, and this comes back to a little bit connected to the joy at work, Steph, if you don't understand how your people work, who they are and what they want, and what they're going to do despite what you want them to do, you have missed an opportunity. I always joke and say in organizations, we kind of catalog work by job descriptions, right? And a hierarchy or catalog. No one's doing that. Like, if we're all honest with ourselves, no one even knows where their job description is. People are doing what they need to and want to do within the context of the organization. But actually, if you really understood what people were doing, what they wanted to do, and how they wanted to do it, you would have performance sustained by the very nature of what you've built in. And so when we're doing work design, involving the people who are doing the work, as well as the leaders and anybody else who's an interested party, but most importantly, the people who are doing the work and understanding where they get their joy from, that is a game changer. That completely changes the profile. And again, I would just say the reason why is you will know, and many organizations that I speak to say there's some people who, oh, I want to get AI, I'm on the bus, I'm doing the thing. There's probably the second group who are like, well, I know I've got to do this, but I'm just a bit exhausted and a bit overwhelmed. And by the time I've done that tomorrow, something will be different. So I'll just see where this goes to. So they're not averse, but they just sort of hanging out and doing their thing. And then there's a third party who are like absolutely terrified, who are reading all the things that we see in the media around my job is going, I'm just not doing this. So I'm just not going to do this. And every organization has that mix, getting people involved in how the work's going to get done. They first of all know best, and getting them involved in how their motivations, aspirations, who they are at their very being creates fundamental difference. And that for us has been absolutely differentiator. You will go as fast as your people allow you to. Whether you think that's true or not, that is the
Yep.
case.
And how you bring them on that journey in a way that's constructive. Actually, you're giving them skills to be more employable with your organization or elsewhere as well. There's a huge opportunity there, isn't there?
100%. And it's hard. It's not like an easy to do, but if you understand what they are interested in doing and what they're capable of doing, you can then rework your organization in a much more sustainable way. And you can bring costs down from, hiring and letting go. That's been the sort of standard. Actually, we can change that standard. And actually, Steph, I was going to say, when we've done work with you, that's one of the things that's so lovely about what you do is we can capture that. So that's not like hey, Sam, what do you think? What gives you energy? It's not that kind of conversation. It's a data-driven conversation around where energy happens. And that has made the fundamental difference.
Love that. And so many transformations in the past, when organizations have gone through those big traditional transformations have really failed, haven't they? Because people don't actually then go and do the new thing and they don't have that clarity and they're not bought in. And it's all been done in a sort of private tent over here. So this is a real opportunity to do things differently because all the cards are on the table. There's no sort of, we might be going through a transformation, don't tell anyone. The whole world's going through it. So it's an opportunity to have a more transparent process.
And they are truly involved. And that's not, so I think in the past, maybe we would have heard, we want to involve you, please have your voice heard, and I think often organizations start with that intent. So don't get me wrong, I don't think there's an intent not to. But then when it comes to the actual doing, that doesn't necessarily translate. Whereas when we're doing work design, that is fundamental to the actual how we do it. And so that becomes real and lived and experienced by the people. And then they go and tell others, this is real and lived in. So yes, I was involved. In fact, I designed this. It wasn't like I was just involved. It was like, I can actually drive it forward. If I think about sort of one of the latest groups of people that we're talking about, that has been absolutely it. We've had such people going, this is so exciting. I mean, isn't that great when you think about a transformation going from, okay, here we go again, brace yourself, to this is so exciting? That feeling and that momentum and energy just becomes what drives it forward. And then leaders don't need to be the drivers, they just need to be the custodians. And I think that is hugely, hugely helpful and different. Yeah.
Yeah, that's game changing. So actually, let's go into a case study. If you can think of a project you've worked on recently or a function or, an organization to bring this to life, because I think, there'll be people who are watching or listening to this saying, well, that sounds good in theory, but in reality, how does that actually work and how did you drive performance? Can you tell us about an example?
Definitely. I'm going to think back to probably one of the examples that we're still working with it, but absolutely. And to your point, we always start with the design, right? And that's never how it operationally actually works out. So that's just part of, and so that's how we've learned to do this over time. So I think recently we've worked with a sales organization, and I think this often resonates with because most organizations have sales, and they're trying to get the most from in a really tough market. How do we make sure revenue is coming in the way we want? And are we doing the right things? And so we spent a lot of time with this team really understanding. And again, Steph, we do this with you in this example. So that's a great partnership. So the process is very much understanding what is happening today, but from the perspective of the people actually doing the work and the leaders who are driving that work, who have the intent, and getting everyone to really understand what does that look like. And whilst people think, oh, well, we kind of know that, when you actually see it in the data form and you actually understand how people are translating that, it is super powerful. And so you can probably better talk about this than me, but like the tags around critical work, strategic work, work that gives you energy, when you can see that across this group of people who are doing the work, how they're currently using AI, you see these huge differences and we're all doing this, but no one knew. So both of those things happen. And so in this particular instance, that group of people were amazing. They really lent in, they helped us, they understood. And what we got to see was there's a group of people using AI incredibly well, but it's not necessarily shared across the entire piece. So how do we get that to be understood? We also, interestingly, and this is going to be fascinating to how this plays out, we could see there were certain persona types and personality types that were more prone to leaning into that in that group, and others who weren't, but if it was positioned in a different way and they understood it around structure and help, would take it up. And then others who were just needed psychological safety is super important for this throughout, and that's important. But if they just needed psychological safety to lean in. And so what it allows you to see is those who are just doing this anyway, what the others need as an intervention to actually take them forward, because you can actually get under the skin of that, because you can have those conversations about what would help you get this done. And so the learning and development intervention off the back is then very targeted rather than, hey, you all need to get on this bus, otherwise Yeah, no, it's going to
Yep.
happen. So that was super important. I think the other thing that came out was we could see which particular tasks were the tasks that were really going to move, we're going to move the dial. So there were lots of tasks that people are doing. And again, we all have this, we're all busy, but how productive is like great. And actually, I don't know, I want time to be less busy, more thoughtful, and more productive. And I think logically we want that, but that's not how we are wired in work at the moment. In work at the moment, it's like at pace, execute. And there's little time for thinking, for what am I doing? How is that actually getting me forward? Because you're so busy doing the things you're doing. And this allows people time and space to really think about that. It allows them to see that. And so we were able to really understand, I think, what was, and Harriet and the team worked closely with you on this. And so kudos to her and the team, what those power core tasks were, that if the team focused on those, AI could get and automation could do a lot of the others. They were still important tasks to get done, but this is where the humanity came in. And then the joy that comes with that, yeah, is super interesting. I think the only other thing I'd say is you could see where people's energy was. So some people were super energized, some people really weren't. And then you're going to fundamentally change the work, right? Because we're breaking that box open. We're not, this is the kind of work that now looks like. What people can really understand is that the kind of work that's going to make me get up and, feel like I'm going to take on the day? Or is that actually the kind of work that isn't? And I can go and look at what kind of work will. And I'll come back to that psychological safety is important, that people can do that and know that they will still have an opportunity to do other type of work. That's not just being taken from them.
Yeah. I think a lot of roles have morphed into many, many tasks. And if we actually think about creating specialization where humans can have an impact in the work and where that judgment's needed and so on, then there's probably AI can do these things. These humans who are wired this way and who are, good at this and energized by this type of work, which often go hand in hand, they can do these types of things, but there's always like other things to do as well. So breaking out work and having more focused roles can be really powerful to give that thinking time as well and get to become more of an expert.
Absolutely. And when you break out those tasks, to your point, Steph, we've kind of rolled that all together. And again, let's take salespeople. If you ask salespeople to input things into a system, how often does that happen in reality, right? It's just, and I'm generalizing, but that's not, they're like, oh, I've got to set aside my Friday afternoon for learning and putting things in the system, right? Like, and that never happens. And then it's like constantly change. Like, and it was ever such, it's like, are we mad that we've just kept it? So now you can break up the tasks and go, actually, how do things get in the system without me having to kind of drain the life out of this person? They can focus on these things. But there's also, we've got to remember AI is AI. It's not human. I was reading some really interesting initial research yesterday of how you get lulled into sometimes thinking, oh, it is right. And actually, it's not always right. And it doesn't have a human perspective, and it doesn't have the wisdom, and it doesn't have judgment. It is literally put forward. It's collective. This is what I've collected on what happens most times, and it's putting that forward. So when you break those tasks down, you then have very different tasks, which a lot of different personas can do. So some will then lean into more of the whatever those new tasks are, and some will have to check and that actually lends itself well to some of those personas. They're like, yes,
Mhm.
I want to be the checker, validator, quality assurance. And that's really important, as well as the relationship. But those relationship people could go forward knowing what they have produced is actually safe, reliable, valid, good things. And so it creates opportunities. Yeah, great opportunities.
Such a good point. There's a whole new set of tasks that and work that's been created around this. And also, bit of a tangent, sorry, but the team leader role. Like, what is the role of a manager now? It's just I heard you talking about this on a Randstad webinar as well, but it's come up again and again because for me and with our clients as well, because it's the role of the team leader today is stressed enough with so many things to do and responsibility up, down, sideways for psychosocial safety, for change, and of course now managing through all of this change as well as day job and being a specialist and technical expert. So how do you see that role evolving?
Yeah, I think it's going to evolve massively. I mean, you will now have, So if you think about the team leader's work is, and again, if you do work design on this, it's really interesting, right? What's the impact of a team leader? What would be ultimate impact of a team leader? Their team would be happy, productive, doing great things, right? That team now consists of humans and AI and agentic. Do they understand what's making the humans happy, productive, what have you? Are they able to understand how that sits in the structure but gives enough space for the humans to be human? Do they understand what the agents need in order for work to get done? So, how is the checking validated? Do they understand how the AI? So, I think it'll become fundamentally different, Steph, around what that impact and what tasks will they give to an agent in their own job? How does that agent check in? And then where they spend quality time. So instead of having, as an example, one-to-ones every week, which kind of feels similar and what have you, and have got endeavors, imagine you had some that surfaced up to you that you could have really tightened conversations truly about what gives you joy and how do I make sure that's more in your life and how do I get rid of obstacles. So we've always spoken about that, but I think that's going to be really interesting. I also think, and I think this is true for kind of skills of humans, I feel like there's lots of C's in skills for humans: curiosity, collaborate. That seems to be they all begin with a C. That seems to be I'm going with that because that's like the standard. And
Mhm.
then judgment comes in. I'm like, oh, there's a J. So I'm sure we'll find a C too. But I think how we think about breaking things down. So what am I trying to achieve? How does that work? How does that work? I think that's often one of the things that we see when we're partnering with an agent or with AI. That's super important. Again, some of this initial research we saw yesterday is, what do agents need to be successful? They need very clear instructions in what roles are. Humans actually don't need it as much. Humans need intent. What are you intending? Because I'll be able to figure my way through that because I've got judgment and so they need quite different things. And so I think the role of the manager and how they treat that is going to be fascinating. We
Fascinating.
need to help them, right? We're like this isn't just like, oh, I'm enlightened, I know how to do this. We're going to have to help managers really think about what those skills are in the future.
Mm.
How many of those do you need? Again, I in talking to different organizations over the last, some people said they've actually shoved in a huge amount of the manager to do, and that's created constraint from the managers. I can't do what my one-to-ones in the same way as I always have, so I have to change that up. And they've got create. So sometimes putting in a challenge or a constraint boundary creates something different. And I think that actually, going back to when we're doing work design, that's sometimes what we put in. We put in a challenge or a constraint boundary to help people imagine, because it's a hard thing to do. And so that as a technique is really important.
Mm. Two more C's for you.
Yeah.
So
Did
one
you go
is,
C's? Were you like, what C's?
yep, yep. Now I looked in the dictionary. No, I do have two C's for you. So one is just managing change, right? Being a change manager, I think is going to be, particularly in this period of transition, because what we see is that you have leaders who are themselves, forget the team for a minute, themselves really can't, like, find it very hard to think in a new way. How could it possibly work in a different way? This has been successful. I've been successful in this sort of operating model. This is what's worked for me. It works for our customers, works for our people, and just kind of go into that protect mode. And so I'm worried about, the people who are ready to adapt and change and who are kind of embracing it, and those managers who aren't. I'm worried about, where are they
Yeah.
going to go?
Yeah. And I'm still, it's really interesting, right? I actually was talking about this here. We talk about the concept, and you and I have discussed before, of unlearning. I worry when organizations come to me and say, can you tell me the best practice on these, please, and send me 7 case studies. I'm all good. I understand the reason for case study, understand the learning, absolutely. But when people are asking for best practice all the time, that makes me think that they are not applying their imagination. They're just kind of like, what are others doing? Okay, great. We'll take bits and pieces. I just don't think that's what leaders are going to have to do in the future. They're having to orientate something which doesn't have a best practice or playbook. And I think using that muscle more without necessarily, you should always know what others are doing. But that research we can do, like, if someone's paying a consultant for that, I want to say, can you stop doing that? That's not what you should be paid. They can go and find that. You can do your research. You can contextual understanding of that becomes really important. But I think, like you say, I haven't actually come across a person who doesn't want to change. What I often come across is that people are scared, unsure, clear. That's the thing that we've got to help. That's the change profile. And that absolutely has some structure of the good old change that we had. So providing structure, super important. But it's not really about that. It's around understanding that person and those personas. And then how do you get change through? And again, so, and you know Harriet well, like we learned this through work design. It's not that people don't want to change, but they want to be part of the change, right? They're not that's it. When people are creating the change, that's that's inherent in it. It's not a change process. We
Yeah,
should
yeah.
ban
That's right. Yeah.
that word, change process. Yeah.
And it's a win-win because actually, if they're doing the work, they are the experts in the work, and you kind of need them to design. Yeah, but we have to help them think differently. So the other C is cognitive decline. So I'm hearing this more and more is if people become so reliant on AI. So let's imagine there's a manager managing a team. You've got your sales team, for instance, and we sort of take verbatim, what AI might be serving us up a script or what have you. How do we make sure that we're helping people to continue to learn and to grow and to develop that expertise in that environment?
And I think we have to build some of that into, so, we've been talking about the sort of what of the work, the impact, task skills. There's a definite piece on the how. So just because you can hand it off, there is a question to ask. Should you hand it off? And what will the implications be? And I don't think we can think through those in a completely holistic way because we're learning. But one of the things we do know is, and we will all know this, you will know this in your personal life. If you've over relied on something, and particularly if you've over relied on an LLM, like you realize, oh, this is really hard to do when it's not there. So I do think there's parts that we should build in and go, so it's not there.
Yep.
Yeah. There's been some form of energy crisis and I can't switch this on.
Mhm.
I go about thinking through this. And so I think we're going to have to build in exercises for cognitive and ask the question. So when AI provides something, what questions am I asking myself? How am I critically thinking through that? What have I been fed that is just part of my echo chamber? So I certainly think about that. I was talking about this yesterday on this panel as well to say within that there's also not just yourself, but how you bring others with differing opinions. And again, diverse views has always been a better outcome. You're going to have to build diverse views in. The AI will bring a collective intelligence. It doesn't bring a human specific intelligence on this particular, and it's uncomfortable, right? It's irritating sometimes. We just want to move forward, but actually we're going to kind of have to slow that down. So I think the way we look at how and what work is, again, I think we've had a little bit of this conversation before. The other thing is how do we measure people then? Is one of the measurements going to be how are you using your cognitive ability and critical thinking? And that requires a slowing down of the pace of work in order to do that. And how will we measure that as organizations to know how did you apply your critical thinking and your actual own specific cognitive ability to this? And maybe that's some of the things we know that when we measure things, that's what people focus on. So I think there's a real responsibility on work design to think about measures of success of the outputs of tasks, etc., but also measures of success in terms of how that work gets done to preserve what you want to preserve for the long term.
Yeah, that's really hard, isn't it? Because you've got pressures coming. Let's go back to the CEO pressures from the beginning. You've got pressures coming on costs, on productivity, do more, do more. And in the past, the measure of productivity has been how much can a person do? Or that's been the sort of how we think about it.
Yeah.
And what you're saying now is how do you, through like designing roles, how do you actually create space for deeper thinking, maybe talking about higher quality output? I mean, if you think about a sales team, we're going to have to increase targets on revenue. We're going to have to see revenue increase in order for performance to increase. And obviously, freeing up time might do that. But so, how do you reconcile that?
And that is the quality piece, right? We're saying if some of the AI can do the doing, so, and we've seen that in that sort of when we looked at those power core, the AI can help do some of the stuff that gives you time back. That time could be spent going spending time with your children. I'm not saying or your family or whatever. Absolutely, there's also time and work that kind of says now I'm going to spend that differently. I'm now going to think about, and we've always spoken about working smart. You are now able to work smarter because you have tools that are helping you work smarter. So increase in revenue doesn't mean busier or more time. And in fact, actually, in that case study, we saw that burnout was a real issue because it was like, I've got to do more in order to get more. That's not changed that equation. Yeah. You've got to do different in order to get more. That equation has changed in their mind. And so I think there is something quite beautiful if we do this right, Steph, around giving that ability. I wrote something the other day, and again, and we all know this, if you go and have a walk at lunchtime or whatever, you go and spend your time, we tend to think, oh, I'll have a podcast on then because I need to, can't possibly just be walking in nature. I mean, that would just be right. Like, no, I must be feeding or I'm exercising with something that I'm watching that is like,
I
but
feel so
actually,
seen. I feel so seen right now.
but that is what we all, because it's like, oh, I have to keep up. But actually, what we know is if you go and walk in nature for 30 minutes without anything, what is actually happening is your brain is able to think, process, come up with different things. And so we're going to have to build that in because it's not what we built into work. So we're going to have to build it in order to get back to some sort of, yeah, reasonable place where you actually can do that, right? So we've almost got to this crescendo point where I think people are a little bit like, I can't possibly add in. So now we are subtracting in a really great way. I actually hate the word subtraction because it makes me feel like I'm missing out on something. So I psychologically push back on the word subtraction. And I understand the intent and the thinking behind subtraction. In fact, my boss sometimes does it, and I literally have this like, it's something's being taken away and that can't be good, surely, even though I know that is, but I think it's that creation of space for a better outcome. But Steph, I think you raise a great point. Then if we go back to work design, the starting point is what's the impact and outcome. And it is fascinating to me when we've done work design that is really not where people start. They look at the tasks often, but they're not looking at the impact and outcome and really focusing in on that because the task should come off the back of that, not way around. And when you do that, you get a completely different sense of it. I'm going to say, because we certainly haven't solved this, I mean, we're creating this rubric on what are the questions that organizations ask themselves to make sure they're not eroding things like cognitive ability, but also stopping, we see it now in articles, brain fry, right? So stopping brain fry, not eroding cognitive ability. I think organizations are going to have to come up with how did they think about that and how are they building that into the work and the design of work. It's certainly going to be super important.
Yeah, because I think as well, we can think about productivity, how do we become efficient and increase output and so on. But fast forward a few years from now, and if AI is sort of leveling the playing field for any particular group of competitive organizations, it's going to need to be the quality of the human thought and creativity and thinking beyond what AI can capture that will differentiate and help them survive beyond their competitors, right?
Agree.
So it's probably now at this point, as organizations start to think about how do I want to design work and be really intentional about that and what do we want to design for. So I think one of the mistakes that some organizations are making is they're designing for efficiency only, where we need to be thinking about what's going to differentiate us in the future. Are we designing for our customer experience, for our employee experience? How are we going to grow the future capability? We don't know, where our organization's necessarily going to go, or maybe you do. But yeah, how do you grow through that
It,
design?
it's such a incredibly valid point, and actually almost I hadn't spoken about because when we're doing work design, we've almost built that in as efficiency and augment as a baseline. Goes to your point, efficiency, it's a bit like cost saving. Yes, it's absolutely got, but it's not the thing. That doesn't get you growth. That's not what it is. And so you have to fundamentally start with that. I say there's makeups of organizations, there's different personas that work in organizations with different kind of work. You have some of those. What you also want is a percentage of your organization that doesn't listen to the data, that doesn't, that goes against the grain, because that's where you get some crazy ideas that are there. Yeah. So you do want absolutely a large part of your organization efficient and augmented in reimagined work in that's got outcomes and impact. I mean, just imagine an organization where people are joyful about what they're doing. They really like it. They want to get better at it and they're constantly learning because it's who they are in their inherent core, and they want to kind of make that so, and they believe in the purpose and the mission. And you've got some crazy people who are coming up with crazy ideas where they're like, oh, but imagine an organization where that is a place of generally people are having a great time. They feel challenged. I mean, to be clear, when I say joy at work, it doesn't mean we're sort of all just very comfortable. There's discomfort in joy at work, right? There's discomfort in the challenge, but it's around the type of tasks and outcomes that really make you get up and sing. And we all know when we hit them, we know where they are. If we could create that flow throughout the organization, just by its inherent being creates sustainable performance.
And carrying this thread through, I think in the past that might have been seen as a luxury for organizations to think about how happy are my people and so on. Or maybe it's, you're going to be thinking about if attrition's an issue, but actually, bigger picture, that's probably a core asset for organizations, right? A core differentiator.
Absolutely. And as you say, AI and agents and processes become like that's the standard and we all have access to it. Let's assume in some, like, what is the differentiator? This becomes now the thing. This is what it is. It is no longer, it is a bizarre that it was a luxury, but this is now 100% how you get this done and how you make your organization and decide what it is your essence of your organization, because that's where it sits. It's going to sit in, we talk about it as its soul, right? It's like, what's the soul? Because that's the thing that will take you forward. The rest of it should be there. All of those things are good, but the soul needs to, that's what people buy from you for, right?
Yep.
They want to make sure the rest is taken care of. But yeah, I
Yeah.
think, and Steph, we're doing some research and I'll come out with, but I think this also brings into life how a board thinks about culture and not just thinks about it in a nice, oh, we've got a nice culture here. Because to your point, sometimes that's how it feels. But if you are measuring culture in a proper risk way with a proper fiduciary responsibility, how are you understanding what people are talking about in your organization? Good, bad, and ugly. So I actually want more complaints in my culture dashboard. Because if it's not there, I am just deluding myself. I don't want less complaints. I want more. What I want to see is get under the nature of what are those, what's driving those complaints and how am I addressing that and changing the nature of those as we go. But I don't want to measure the number of complaints. And I think that's often how whistleblowing, the number of whatever it is, we used to look, I want those things. But what I want to understand is what's underneath that and driving that. And if people are in an environment that's joyful and they've got, the nature of that will change.
Hmm.
I feel like the culture dashboard is going to change fundamentally. And I think boards are going to have to look for that. I think, we hear again, it's a social media or a media, not even social. If you hear people letting go and therefore share price rises, I am going to say we know what comes after that.
Yeah.
That's what you hear. What comes after that is the hard work of what happens to keep that performance. And it's actually much harder when you do that. So I actually think the board's responsibility there from a culture perspective is what's just happened there? How have we created risk now? And how, and is that what you want to do? Is that what you want to do? You want to create a whole of it? Is that who you want as your organization? And maybe it is. No judgment here. Maybe that's the type of organization you want. That's its soul and that's its essence. I think most boards would not say that's the case. And we're not seeing, if you went in and checked in a month later, a month after that, a month after that, and you saw what was happening in that organization, I think you would get a very different picture from that just snapshot of this is how things are going. In fact, I know you would get a different picture. We see that often.
Yeah.
Microsoft's a great example. There are CEOs who've worked through that and really get that, and that's how the organization is actually thriving. Yeah.
Yeah. So organizations who thrive will think about people as an asset differently in the future and design
Design
work. Yeah.
around that, and things like culture dashboard will be one of puts of we'll have a very different measurement system around work design rather than what we maybe have today. And that's not an HR job, right? That's a board and executive job.
I'd like to see that. I'd like to see that culture dashboard. And I have a feeling that the organizations who are going to be thriving in the future are the ones that you're working with today, Sam. So lucky them. I have one more question for you. What work energizes you most? What
Yeah.
brings you joy?
Yeah, I mean, I feel incredibly lucky to do the work I do. I love talking to organizations about their complexities and what kind of, and working through those complexities. I love doing things that don't necessarily have an answer yet. So that is super, yeah, that, and some of the stuff we know answers to, but I like doing my gosh, this is coming. How do we get an answer? For me, the mix of, and Steph, you know this, my character at work, I'm known as Alice in Wonderland. The mix of logic and wonder and holding those two things together, that for me gives me joy. So there's some things that you can't explain. How do we explain it? How do we bring the science and the wonder together in one place and create something that's really amazing for people to do? And the drive for that is we spend so much time doing this thing called work. Like, let's make it like, what do we want it to be? We can design it for what we want it to be. We don't have to keep it as it is. We can actually change it to what we would like it to be for humanity. And that brings me great joy. Love doing that with the team who are just I have an awesome team. I love my team. Immensely they are like they give me a lot of feedback, which is good. Sometimes I'm like, God. But so I think it's working in collaboration, partners like yourself. We don't have all the answers. So working in partnerships in like this ecosystem to drive that mission forward, it's just living my best life.
Love that. I love that. Thank you, Sam. Thank you for sharing all your ideas.
Yeah.